So I want to welcome you to a Real Talk Tho event. This is sponsored by the Real News and the Bertha Foundation. Just out of curiosity, how many people have come to a Real Talk Tho event before? Great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming back. We really appreciate it. For those of you who are new here, the Real News is an independent nonprofit news organization, which means we do not receive any government funding. We do not receive any corporate funding. As a matter of fact, we rely on people like you to keep us going. And that's one of the reasons why we've started this community newsroom. It's an opportunity to have a discussion about solutions to help heal our city. And we want your feedback as well. We want to know what stories matter to you and are important to you, because we want to produce those stories for you. This evening, we're going to show a video package. Then we're going to have Eddie Conaway, our executive producer and host of Rattling the Bars, have a panel. And then I'm going to come around with a microphone and give you an opportunity to talk and ask our panel questions. If you are interested in donating to The Real News, you can go to therealnews.com and hit the donate button, or you can go see Arouge right there, and you can donate in person. And please believe me, every little bit counts, and it means a lot. So let me get out of the way and let Eddie start to lead the panel. Thank you so much.
All right, and once again, thank you all for coming. I'm Eddie Conway. I'm an executive producer at The Real News. This program is a collaboration between The Real News and IDBs. So the first thing I'm gonna do is encourage anybody that's hungry or thirsty to buy something to eat or get something to drink. Tonight, we're gonna be talking about something that's really important, and that's how to make our community safer. That's an issue that crosses a lot of different lines. It crossed the line of policing, it crossed the line of poverty, it crossed the line of hope, and it crossed the line of us being involved in what's happening in our particular city. So toward that end, we have assembled a panel of experts to help us understand this. And as Taya mentioned, we're gonna let the panel talk. And once the panel talk, we're gonna open this up for question and answers with the audience. Okay, so first and foremost on our panel, to my right is Sean Yoes. Sean Yoes is the editor, the Baltimore, okay. He's the editor of the AFRO-American newspaper here in Baltimore, which is like one of the oldest Black newspapers in the country. And he's been a journalist for 30 years, so he knows what's going on in this particular city. Beside him is Azeez, who is the operation director of No Boundaries Coalition. He's very active. And she's been working to make this city a better city and putting in the work on the ground. Next to her is Neill Franklin. And Neill Franklin is a former police colonel, I believe, and a 30-year veteran, but he's also director of Law Enforcement Partnership, LEAP, which advocates changing the drug laws so many people won't end up in jail for drugs. And I might add, he also headed up the training of the Baltimore City Police for a number of years. So he brings that expertise to us. Okay, but before we get started, I want you to watch a couple short films that we made that will lay out this whole issue and look at it from several different angles.
Communities across the nation are grappling with how to address police brutality. Fatal police shootings are at their highest level in 2 decades, according to an analysis of FBI crime data. With Baltimore's police review board not having the power to actually hold officers accountable, it's worth looking at those in several cities around the country that do. Cincinnati has a model review board that was established after federal intervention into longstanding accusations of brutality, profiling, and the killing of the 15th black man in 6 years by police resulted in a 3-day uprising by enraged community members. Stakeholders, including the union, agreed police practices needed an overhaul. In the case of a fatal shooting, police are now required to hold a press conference within 12 hours, release the name of the officers involved, along with the dashcam footage from the squad car. Members of the Independent Citizen Complaint Authority are appointed by the mayor but approved by the city council. Unlike Baltimore's board, it can subpoena officers and is mandated to investigate every non-criminal accusation within 48 hours of the complaint being filed. Discipline is determined by board vote and handed down by the city manager outside of the police chain of command. But the ACLU of Ohio's Michael Brickner says police abuse does continue.
Collaborative agreement was not some silver bullet that takes away all policing issues, and that, I would never represent that there aren't still problems in Cincinnati, that race profiling does still occur, that there are incidences of excessive use of force in Cincinnati, and there have been throughout the process.
Another model review board is Washington, D.C.'s Office of Police Complaints, also established after a civil rights investigation and resulting consent decree. A city similar in size to Baltimore, the board has a $2 million budget, full-time staff, and 20 investigators, versus Baltimore's all-volunteer board with 1 investigator and a shoestring budget.
In the national context, the DC Police Complaint Review Board is one of the most effective, one of the models. However, it is almost completely ineffective. At this point, we are seeing very, very few complaints which are being sustained, and where they are sustained, the chief of police, Chief Lanier, has, her position is that the recommendations of the complaint review board are sort of advisory opinions. She doesn't have to follow them.
The Washington, D.C. Office of Police Complaints Board does not have the power to hire and fire the police chief. Instead, the chief reports to the mayor. Detroit is another city that faced federal investigation after police killed nearly 50 people in 5 years. Before it was dissolved by Detroit's emergency manager, its civilian review board was elected and had the power to nominate the chief of police. Activists credit the reform with a sharp drop in the number of African Americans killed by police. By contrast, the City of Toronto's Police Services Board is a very different model. The board is comprised of 2 city council members, civilians appointed by the city and the province, and the mayor can choose to sit on the board or be replaced with another city council member. The police chief handles discipline, but the board hires and has the power to fire the chief. And after being criticized for not better overseeing the highly maligned police response to the 2010 G20 protest, where over 1,100 people were arrested, the board is now asserting its authority over day-to-day policing. But despite the board's efforts to stop racial profiling of the City of Toronto's lowest income communities of color, press investigations and public surveys have found the practices persist. It's caused a public dispute between Toronto Police Chief Bill Blair and Board Chair Alok Mukherjee. The police chief has publicly attacked Mukherjee for saying he found the ongoing racial profiling extremely disturbing and problematic. The Toronto experience shows having a powerful review board can address policing practices, but needs popular support to fully implement its legislative mandate.
One of the most daunting issues facing Baltimore today is safety. After nearly 4 years of record-high homicides, the city has struggled to find lasting solutions to its most vexing problem.
There's no excuse for an individual to take somebody else's life, period.
In the past, the city has turned to policing, investing a disproportionate share of the budget in spending on law enforcement. But with one of the highest ratios of cops to citizens in the country and hundreds of thousands of arrests, little has changed. The department itself is under a federal consent decree, which has led to calls for reform. Councilman Brandon Scott wants to create a civilian commission that would appoint the police chief instead of the mayor.
Going to a structure that has a board of police commissioners, of which the chair of that board will be a citywide elected compensated official that the citizens are directly can hold them accountable, in addition to some appointees who will oversee that person who's the law enforcement.
He also wants to restore local control of the department, which currently resides with the state. But perhaps it's simply the emphasis on punishment itself which obscures the root causes of crime. Social and economic ills that are easy to see if you know where to look. A causality chain between past injustice and present circumstance that is often overlooked. Abject poverty in Black neighborhoods, tax breaks and splendor in white communities, a justice system predicated on punishing African Americans and isolating Black communities. And there are stories from people like Ivan Potts, a young man who was falsely arrested by the Gun Trace Task Force, jailed, and then released into a city unprepared to remedy its wrongs.
They just admitted to their guilt, and I told you the story already. So it's like, who's accountable? Who's gonna be held accountable for this?
Right.
And right now, it's like they just ducking their responsibility.
It's a link between racism and vengeance, the haves and the have-nots, that many say is where the city needs to begin to make amends.
I think you have to start thinking about things like restorative justice, where you restore people's that's been damaged by racism. And that goes for the citizens as well as in the police department.
But really the asset and the wealth that's being developed more and more is the asset of people who have that wealth already.
To break the cycle of despair forged in the past that fuels the violence of the present.
Everything you hear about equality and money's coming in, all of that goes to the upper class. It has nothing to do with the, quote, ghetto area.
This is Taya Graham and Stephen Janis reporting for the Real News Network in Baltimore City, Maryland.
Okay, so the first question is, and I want to focus here for a minute on whether or not community control of the police will help make our city safer. And so that's the question I'm putting to everybody on the panel. And so, Sean, you can start off and we can just go down the line.
I think it depends on what that actually looks like, what community control of the police department would actually look like. I think it's safe to assume, or at least I would, that what has been in place for the last decades has not worked. It hasn't worked for the mostly Black, mostly poor communities of Baltimore, which is the majority of the city. So, again, I would be more comfortable commenting specifically on what a community-based policing kind of policy would look like. But clearly, zero tolerance was the worst thing in my lifetime that ever happened to Baltimore City. And everything that has kind of followed has been seemingly connected to that kind of draconian law enforcement model. So, we can talk about what seems to be happening right now with the new commissioner and how he's proceeding. I think that for him to begin to dismantle the command staff is a major, major, major step, though, I would think. I've written in the past that seemingly every ill of the Baltimore Police Department has trickled down from the command staff over the decades. I think that's probably, at least that's my opinion. Neill may have some insight into that, but I think that, again, we need to see specifically what a community-based policing policy would look like specifically for Baltimore, because this is a unique city with a unique set of challenges, I think.
Yes, I think that local control of the police department is absolutely a step in the right direction. As we just heard, we need to talk about exactly what it will look like, but it's definitely a first step to get us on track because we are funding the police department. It's taken up such a huge chunk of our budget. So for us to be paying for the police, but not being able to have direct authority over the policing is really problematic, and it causes some of the issues that we have seen in the past with the police department. So I do think that if the police are here to serve us, that we should have control here locally in Baltimore City.
So I'm going to begin with reading something here, and this is one of the foundational principles that policing here in America and over in Europe operate under. At least they say they do. This is principle number 2, and these are the Peelian principles. Principle number 2 says to recognize always that the power of the police to fulfill their functions and duties is dependent upon public approval of their existence, actions, and behavior, and on their ability to secure and maintain public respect. Now, I don't know what you guys heard, but what I hear is accountability to the people. And for that to happen, you have to have a structure that makes that happen. And Sean, you were asking questions, so what does that kind of look like? Brandon Scott in a video mentioned the public having the responsibility, the authority to hire and fire the police commissioner. That's part of it. What about controlling the budget of the police department? That's also part of it. What about establishing a basic philosophy about how you go about your business of policing in the city, in your community, in your neighborhood? That's a part of it. Now, we should at least begin to entertain, have that conversation, not just here in this room, but at City Hall, in our neighborhoods, all across the city, of how we can do that, what it will look like. And there are some examples that we can pull from. So it's about accountability to the people, and for that to happen, the people have to have authority over.
But one particular case, Richmond, California, I think is an important case for us to look at, because in that particular case, the citizens formed a alliance, a coalition, a progressive alliance on the ground, and they elected a progressive mayor. They in turn put in a progressive police commissioner. They in turn changed some of the city charter to decide that they were going to make money available each month for people they had targeted as being involved in illegal activities, or maybe as potential gunmen, etc. They hired those people, they gave them a monthly stipend, they got them involved in working in the community. The murder rate for that city went from almost 60 down to less than a half a dozen, because they engaged the people that were involved in what was going on in the street, and they gave them financial aid so that they didn't have to be involved in ways that we know people got to eat. You know, we understand that. But addition to that, what they did was they changed the mandate of the police department. They decided that instead of how many people you lock up, or how many interactions you have with the city, the important piece that they made a judgment on for the police department was how many people did you help in the community? How many people did you direct towards services that were available? And so they became social workers in the community. Of course, they protected the community. That was their primary mission. But their most important way in which they were rated was how much they helped people in the community be able to negotiate the things that they needed to negotiate in order to make that community safer. That happened in Richmond, California, because people down on the ground got together and decided to make some changes. Now, my question is, can a model like that work here? I'm just gonna put that out to the panel.
I gotta go first again? So I think that inherent in changing police culture or the police force or law enforcement policing policy in Baltimore has to be, in my opinion, and I've written about it before, there has to be an acknowledgement that the political infrastructure of the city is irreparably broken. It doesn't work for the majority population of the city, which happens to be poor and happens to be people of color. If we continue to think that we can take the system that has been in operation for the last several generations and just pour new, what the scripture says, pour new wine into old wineskins, it's not gonna work. It can't work. We have to come to the understanding, come to grips with, we need a fundamental, catastrophic change on how we do business as far as governance is concerned in Baltimore. That's my opinion. From that, anything else kind of trickles down from that position, that we have to change many systems, not just the police, not just law enforcement. We have to change many systems within the city in order for the city to function plausibly for the majority of the population. Once we do that, then sure, I think I watch with great interest the Richmond experiment. And the numbers you just cited are exciting to me, to go from a city that has 60 homicides to a city that has less than a dozen homicides. That's progress. I believe still, even as we face 300 homicides again, maybe for the fourth, fifth year in a row, I believe that in my lifetime, I'm prayerful that we will see a day when there are less than 100 homicides in Baltimore City. I believe that. But in order for us to get to that place, we have to continue to do the work that people have been doing on the ground. But there also has to be work coming from the top and a deconstruction, if you will, of how we've been doing business, because business as usual has not worked for the majority of the city of Baltimore.
The short answer to your question is yes. I think a model like that could work in Baltimore. However, I think that the problem with a lot of models like that is that we put too much on police. So we want police officers to be social workers. We want police officers to be, big brothers and big sisters. We want police officers to be mental health counselors. We want police officers to just do so much. And on the back end, we're saying how bad of a job the police are doing at doing just their regular job. And we see the solution to fixing them not doing their regular job is giving them more money to do another program, to do a community outreach program, to do this, to do that. And I see that as just being so problematic. We need to find solutions to the causes of crime. We need to find solutions to crime is a symptom of poverty. So we need to address some of the causes of poverty and stop giving more and more and more jobs for the police to do, because we need the police to do their original baseline job well first. So, that doesn't take away from programs that are great, from programs that do a really good job at serving people. Law enforcement assisted diversion program it's a great program. However, I would prefer that we have somebody who steps in before people even have to get in contact with police, so that the police are not the people who are in charge of these diversion programs to begin with. So yes, it could work, but I think the real problem is making sure that we're having our police be police officers and that we're investing in all of the other services that we need to have healthy communities.
It's not much more for me to add after this, too. But really, I agree with both of those. It can work, to answer that question, but it's temporary. It's temporary. To add on what was previously said, I have a question about the city. Whenever we hear about a plan for this city, it always seems to be surrounding a policing plan, right? What's the commissioner's policing plan? What's the mayor's policing plan for reducing violence in our city? What's the city's plan? More importantly, what's the people's plan? Let's go back to the late 1990s. For those of you that know, there was a people's plan put together that City Hall did not embrace. And it came from the community. And it was about addressing all of these things that make a city safer. Healthcare, mental health, education, housing, jobs, job training, breaking down and eroding and dismantling the systems of racism. Sean, the things that you spoke about. It didn't involve just building things. You have to deconstruct some things sometimes before you can build. And that's what that plan was. So what's the city's plan? And within that city's plan, there's a very small piece called the policing plan. A very small piece. And it should be at the back of this crime reduction piece. The police, the Richmond model, those are temporary measures. What's going to sustain violence reduction and peace in this city? We know what that is, but why hasn't our leaders begun the process of putting together a comprehensive plan where all these things dovetail one another to move the city forward? And it's not a plan that's in line with a 2 or 4 year election cycle. It's a 20-year, it's a generational plan that needs to be put in place that cannot be dismantled by the next administration to come into City Hall. That's why it has to be one established by the people. And we just need to figure out how we do that and force City Hall to do it. Organizing.
My question to the panel is, how can we implement community control of the police department without waiting for city council or without waiting for Annapolis? What is in our power to do to make those changes as people here on the ground? So do you have any?
Neill first.
That was good.
Oh, you got me this time. No, that's a difficult one for us to do without going through City Hall or the state. And of course, we still have that conflict. Is the city police department currently controlled by the state or by the city or both, or what? That needs to be straightened out first. We're talking about passing legislation to make this happen. I don't know if we have the power here in Baltimore to do anything by voter referendum. I don't think that we do.
Yes.
Or do we?
Yes, we do.
Okay, well, that might be your answer. So it goes back to one of the last comments I said about organizing. So we would need some leadership throughout the community to organize to move toward voter referendum to make this happen. But I want to say something, as you saw in the video clip, about the distinct two different models, a review board and then the Toronto version, which was more so a governance board over top of the police department. When I talk about this, I'm speaking of a governance board. A review board to me is addressing issues once they've happened and trying to work from the back forward. I'm talking about a governance board to get ahead of these issues, to get ahead of racial profiling, to hold people accountable, again, to set the philosophy and try to head some of this off so that you don't need a review board. For instance, excessive force, making sure that those policies are not only in place, but making sure that people are held accountable for following those policies on the front end. Doesn't mean that you can't have a review process at the end, but when you have a governance board at the beginning, at the top, your chances are going to be so much better. So, again, the short answer: voter referendum to force City Hall and the state of Maryland to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say pretty much the same thing with regard to a voter referendum. And I think that, this is something that is going to be a bigger lift. And so one thing that we can do is that we can just make sure that we are organizing to reach out to our legislators. We can't elect people and then let them just rest in their seats. We have to be there and be present all the time. So if that means, packing their offices, writing, doing letter writing campaigns or mailer campaigns, whatever we need to do to make sure that we allow them to do their jobs and that we demand that they do their jobs. And that's still organizing, making sure that we all have the same messaging. A lot of times, one of the reasons we can't get things accomplished as community members is because we don't have a unified message. We get caught up in itty bitty things that we want to do a little bit differently. Oh, I want to take this road, I want to take this road, but our destination is the same. And so we need to focus on the fact that our end goal is the same and have unified messaging and say that, and stand as a united front so that no matter who you're talking to, which organization, our messaging is exactly the same. So they can't put people against each other. They can't say, oh, well, when we talk to these advocates, they said they want blah, blah, blah. When we talk to these other advocates, they said they wanted something different. No, organizing across organizations, across types of groups, faith groups, community groups, advocacy groups, all having a unified message and demanding that our legislators do their jobs. We shouldn't have to go behind and do the things that they won't allow us to do.
To dovetail off of what the sister just said, the great silver lining in what she said is that there are literally thousands of people, dozens of groups, dozens of entities that are doing incredible work on the ground in Baltimore City right now as we speak. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We don't have to ask for something from on high to come down and save us. We can save ourselves, but the part of the issue is that we do operate in silos. We do operate in an isolated way, and the ultimate goal is for liberation for people of color, poor people, people living on the fringes of this community. So the work is being done. Just if we can organize in a more plausible way, something like a referendum on community, community policing becomes more viable, I guess. But the good news is that the work is being done. People are in place. A lot of them are in this room tonight.
Hey, Eddie, can I just add a quick piece
Yeah,
to
go
that?
ahead.
We just heard the city council president on video talk about his willingness to move in that direction. All right, that's one. Where's Jack Young on this, right? And if he's not there, don't we have an election coming up in about less than 2 years for mayor, right? I'm sure there's probably a candidate out there who would favor such a proposal. And then we've got some really energetic, at least a handful of city council folks, right? Even in Annapolis, we've got a new guard in Annapolis. Some faces have changed in Annapolis. The opportunity is there if you want it bad enough. You just got to want it bad enough.
Okay, what we just heard is that this is bigger than just the focus on the police. That's part of it. But beyond that is that even if we found a way, and I think we can because that referendum idea, and we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, it only takes 10,000 signatures to put an issue on the ballot for 2020. 10,000 signatures. And we can figure out how to do that. We heard from the panel that there are hundreds of groups working right now in the city, and they're working in silos, meaning they're working around their particular issue by themselves, but there's connections here and there. Sometimes there's 6, 7, 8, 9 of those different networks, organizations working together. But if we could get 50 or 60 of them working together, we could do the referendum thing. But beyond that, we have to be aware that we need to do something else, because just because we can control the police, people still got to eat. People still got to have jobs. People still have to be taken care of in terms of food, clothing, and shelter. And so we need to, that's one of the things we need to look at. What's going to happen is I ran out of time, and I want to open this up to the audience and take questions.
I have a question. What is this referendum that you speak of? specifically?
Okay, the city, in the city charter, it allows for citizens of this city to take a petition around and get 10,000 signatures of voters, 10,000 signatures of voters. Those 10,000 signatures will then allow them to put an issue on the ballot in November, say 2020. They have to design that issue. It has to go in front of the city council, I believe, to make, huh?
Exactly. And
Well,
it's actually ironic that you mentioned that because
Okay.
that is exactly what we are here for.
Oh, okay, so you know about this. So that was a setup. Okay, go
Yes,
ahead.
it was. Jillian and I are with Women Against Private Police, and we actually need 25,000 signatures by the end of this month. Our appeal for them to accept our petition has been denied today. So we need the signatures or else by, the petition. The petition, yeah, yes.
So the petition is just to put on the ballot in November 2020 the Hopkins Police Force. Whether or not we want, the public wants, to be patrolled by the private police of Hopkins University that answers only to the Board of Trustees of Hopkins, but we have to obey them. So, I mean, in essence, based on what you've been talking about now, Baltimore is going backwards. Now it's authorizing a private police force that's accountable not to the public, but to the Hopkins Board of Trustees. We didn't get to vote. Our legislators just passed this at the last General Assembly. Now let us vote on whether or not we want to be policed by a private force, really, that has no accountability. And that's what this petition is about. If we get enough signatures on the petition, it goes on the ballot in November 2020. Otherwise, July 1st, it's a done deal.
I'm just asking clarification. We've been hearing about 10,000 signatures. You're talking about 25,000. What can you explain?
So this is a very different, kind of referendum. This is a state referendum to veto a law that was passed by the General Assembly. What they're talking about is a city referendum to amend the city charter. Even if you amend the city charter, how do you change state law by amending the city charter? I mean, you have the Baltimore Police Department that is under state control, as we just heard. And you're going to have a state law that's already in effect, giving a private corporation the right to its own police force that's going to patrol public streets and that we are going to have to respond to. Otherwise, they're going to arrest us.
Okay, we have a panel member that want to address that, but I just want to say one thing, because what's important about the John Hopkins Police Force is they're armed, and so they can kill people, and they're not accountable to anybody. Can you?
Actually, what I wanted to bring up was the clarification that just came up because I was going to jump in before she started talking, and that's that this is a state issue. So for Baltimore City referendums, the threshold is 10,000 signatures, and we put it on the ballot, and we don't have to get approval from city council. If community members say they want it, nobody can veto community. It goes straight to the ballot. But the local control of the police or community control of Baltimore City Police is a state issue, so it's not the same threshold. It will be a statewide referendum, and the threshold for signatures is a lot higher. So I just want to distinguish that it's not just as simple as doing a local ballot initiative. It is a statewide effort, and city council is not going to be the ones who would be in charge. It would be our statewide legislators. And also, people from the Baltimore delegation, when this was in Annapolis this past session, people from the Baltimore City delegation voted against it. So I just want to be clear about that as well. There were some people from the Baltimore City delegation who opposed it. There were.
All right, so some opposed it. Okay,
And if we don't have unanimous, a unanimous vote from the Baltimore City delegation, that's a problem because we're talking about Baltimore City. So again, we need to get our legislators on the same page because at the statewide level, they're up there and they're disagreeing. So we need to make sure we get our cards in a row at the city level.
okay, there's another question on the floor.
Thank you. So I think we all can agree that the responsibility of public safety doesn't fall squarely on the shoulders of BPD, right? In fact, a lot of Baltimoreans believe that we have a shared responsibility to get it right. So here's my comment and my question to the panelists. Baltimore has tended to just look for subject matter experts to figure out how to tackle this problem of public safety. Policy subject matter experts, policing subject matter experts. What then? We get a policy, we get policing, everything's all well and good. It's not, right? In the last legislative session, we saw Annapolis shut down the proposed bill for BPD control, as you just mentioned. And we've been looking at the problem of public safety as just a technical problem that requires a subject matter expert, when in fact it's an adaptive challenge. So when you're working through adaptive challenges, subject matter experts aren't enough. They just aren't. Real leadership isn't a noun, it's a verb, right? It requires action and activity. So, and it typically requires disruption, and it's risky and requires experiment, and you might fail. It's elusive, but you gotta keep getting at it. You might not even know when the solution's gonna come. You just gotta keep trying. So if you're smart, you fail fast. Here's my question for the panelists.
Thank you.
I actually talk shorter than the folks at the other table.
Okay, go ahead.
So in your opinion, what are some specific risks that the leaders in Baltimore City should take to redefine public safety and to make some progress toward the adaptive change and not the technical stuff that needs to get done to get us to a place of public safety?
Okay, but I think that was to the panel, but I know you. Okay, go ahead.
Well, what I wanted to say is I don't disagree with anything that you said, but I do want to slightly push back on what you said in that subject matter experts are not enough. I think the problem is who we're looking to or who we're considering subject matter experts. Because when it comes to how we are policing communities, community members are the subject matter experts, and all too many times the community members are not the people who are asked for their opinion. So to answer your question, I think the risk, and I don't think it's a risk, but the risk that our leadership needs to take is to ask the community members and the people who are most affected by policing to be the ones to come up with solutions for what policing needs to look like in order to be effective in our community.
And I'm in full agreement with that. I would just add this a little bit of specificity. So there are people who are heads of community organizations, let's say just for an example, someone who's been on the ground for 30 years, understands how their neighborhood works inside and out, has been doing the work since the 1970s. We should, to dovetail on what the sister just said, we should empower and financially invest in people like that who understand how Baltimore City works, how West Baltimore works, how East Baltimore works, how Park Heights works, how Bel Air Edison works, how all of these communities work. And they're in our presence, they're in our midst in plain sight. But we don't tap into that wisdom and that power that they've accumulated over decades. I mean, I said it before, there are people in this room who have been doing work on the ground, dirty, grimy work, trying to keep the city from being torn asunder. We don't tap in, the leadership of the city doesn't tap into their expertise or their knowledge or their wisdom. And not just tap into it, give them some money. Put some money in their hands, give them some power. Empower them to do what needs to be done for our communities. Because clearly the leadership doesn't have a full understanding of how our communities work, so.
When it comes to what my co-panelists have just said about subject matter experts, who are all within the borders of Baltimore City. We don't need to be reaching out of Baltimore City. They're in each one of our neighborhoods and communities. We know them, we see them every day, we work with them. In addition to that, one risk that I do want to point out that I think is absolutely necessary, we have to be willing to push back against some systems that have been in place in this country for a very, very long time. And one important system of policies is that of the war on drugs and drug prohibition. Here's what I mean by that. We need to push back against the system that has been in place of the war on drugs and its racist foundation from day one. Racist foundation from day one. That's what it's about, people. Read up on the history of these policies. Read up on Anslinger, who was the nation's first drug czar. Read up on his attacking of Billie Holiday as victim target number one. But here's my point. We have to be willing to do things like opening up overdose prevention centers to where our people can go and use what they believe they need, what they feel they need, get the counseling that they need, get on-demand treatment when they want it. We have such a center in Vancouver, Canada, where thousands of people go every year to use their drugs. Yes, I'm saying that, to use their drugs. Millions of doses given to themselves. Not one person has died in this center, ever. They have them in Europe. Canada's opening up more. And yes, this goes against our federal policies. Philadelphia wants to do it. San Francisco wants to do it. This administration on Capitol Hill and in Washington, D.C. is threatening them not to do it. We need to be willing to take a risk and push back against this system that has been in place. Look at the incarceration numbers. Look at the overdose death rates in Baltimore City historically, and look at where the intention and the money continues to go when we're talking about treatment and when we're talking about people who are suffering from addiction. It ain't Baltimore, folks. It ain't, I hear you, Shorty. It ain't your neighborhood. But that's one risk of many that we can take. We just have to be bold, folks, and push back against these systems that have been in place. We need to dismantle the systems that sit squarely upon a racist foundation, and that's just one example of many that I just gave you. I mean, I'm not even talking about redlining. I'm not even talking about, I'm not talking about gentrification. I'm not talking about, and Hopkins as it relates to gentrification. I mean, there's so much more I could talk. Never mind, I'll stop right there.
I really don't think doing legal crack houses is pretty much a good idea. But the point is this here. I mean, Baltimore City is a city of individuals, no communities. You got so many different nonprofit organizations on different pages. It's so hard to get them in the same room together to discuss any kind of solution except for their own solutions they have. You got the homeless advocate, you got this advocate, you got this advocate. By the way of a corrupt Baltimore City government that's actually escalating the whole thing. It's like this here. We don't have communities, we have neighborhoods where nobody know each other. Until actually communities is actually achieved, you're not gonna have anything better than that. I'm saying start block associations and give them the these condemned buildings so they can actually develop and have wealth in those areas so they can invest in the progress of Baltimore when the work is being done. You have so many different jobs capable of the infrastructure, any kind of work done in Baltimore City could put these brothers to work, and that would cut down the crime. All these brothers want is jobs. There's jobs, so many jobs out here. This fixing up Baltimore City, but the Baltimore City government is not going to do it because they don't want it. They want to escalate the crime. They give more money to the police department to hold brothers down. Until actually communities, like I said, if I wanted to give anybody community a lot of money, who would I write that check out to? there's nobody. This is why none of the money that's supposed to be going for communities never get there. That's why our schools is failed. This is why just about everything is failed, because simple fact, we have so many different nonprofit advocates. We don't have community. You have no kind of community developments or business development that actually bring business to these communities so they can make money to invest in the progress of Baltimore City.
The Real News is making one of its back rooms available to anybody that want to pull together these silo organizations, or anybody that want to continue this discussion that's not on Tuesday night, that know people from 5, 10, 15 organizations that want to come together, that want to talk about creating a referendum. If it's an issue that you're raising, like let's use these abandoned houses to create employment for our young unemployed people. If that's got to be on a referendum that forces the city, because the citizens vote for it, to make it happen, the space is available in the Real News, not in the Real News, but in one of the Real News areas. All you have to do is get in touch with us, get people together. You can come together. You can break that idea of those silos. You can break those ideas of one group working to deal with Hopkins, another group working to have justice for Tyrone West, another group working to have environmental safety, et cetera, et cetera. There's so many groups that can come together and they can support each other and they can come up with some common strategy to put things on the ballot. The same time they get the 10,000 signatures for this, they can get the same 10,000 signatures for that. So that's available. I'm telling you now, the Real News will make that space available. Get in touch with me, and we will see what we can do to help. Okay?
Oh, thanks a lot.
All right. Yeah.
All right, speaking on that availability, we're going to get ex-felons the right to vote, and we're going to be pushing ex-felons for voting in 2019, 2020. All right? And we're going to get ex-felons to join the Republican Party so we can deal with racism and the war on drugs in 2019, 2020. Now, my question or my conversation here is, I'm an advocate in, I'm a prisoner's right advocate. I'm an interstate compact. I came here straight out the penitentiary in 1991. All right, I'm an import. I'm property. And right now, y'all mad at Alabama about the abortions, when y'all should be mad at Alabama about the prison investment that Baltimore City and Baltimore, the state of Maryland, has in Alabama, their prison industry, our investment there versus the abortion investment. You understand what I'm saying? If you want to stop the violence in America, you need to end the war on drugs, period. I've been selling drugs since 1974. They were selling drugs long before I was born. You've been dying on the same street corners, and you got the penitentiaries lined up with grandfathers and grandsons behind the illegal war on drugs. You've seen the 13th Amendment, and y'all hosted events over there at the Real News about the new face of old Jim Crow. You need to approach your senators, your congressmen, and your legislative bodies and start talking about ending the war on drugs, not a referendum. Start approaching the grand jury under Senate Bill 374 and demand access to the courts like Thurgood Marshall did. Stop having your hat in your hand and put your briefcase in your hand and go to court. The same way that they beat us, we need to beat them. Now, ending the war on drugs is going to eliminate a lot of poverty because I ain't going to be spending $47,000 a year to lock JoJo up. I'm going to start spending $30,000 and $40,000 a year to educate JoJo's sons and his grandkids to not reparations, but to rebuild the community that you destroyed with an illegal war on drugs. That was a war in the black community, and I ain't heard nobody on that distinguished panel other than Mr. Franklin. We had this conversation for how many years?
I stopped counting, Shorty. I've known you for a while now.
I went to jail to end the war on drugs. You can look at my state case. I came here in the Interstate Compact, N62528, State of Illinois versus Dwayne Davis. I turned in guns and drugs to the police because I wanted to stop the killing and the violence. I wanted my kids to live. If I'm selling drugs, I got to kill somebody to keep my crown. You feel me? So if you're going to address this violence, end the war on drugs.
All right, thank you, thank you.
First of all, I'd like to thank Brother Eddie Conway and others at Real News for providing an opportunity to air our issues and air our differences, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you, Eddie Conway and the Real News. Now, down to the real business. The police. I have a very different vision of the police because I've been to Cuba several times, and the last time was about 3 weeks ago for about 2 weeks. And the kinds of things that we're talking about does not happen in Cuba. It does not happen in Cuba. And I'll have to leave it to you to decide on why it doesn't happen in Cuba. But the bottom line here is that the police are a coercive force of the state. I don't mean the state of Maryland. I mean local, state, and national governments. Let's look at what a crime is. Is it a crime when health care or the lack of health care makes maybe over millions of people in the United States of America die of earlier than they could? Let's look at Alabama. Is that a crime? Is it a crime when a woman does not have a chance to choose? It is a crime. Is it a crime when the United States actually has killed by Hopkins, at least by Hopkins' count, indirectly or directly over 500,000 people in Iraq? And that's just the latest. Is it a crime to talk about COINTELPRO, which in some respects still exists today? So I think we have to reevaluate what a crime is. We have to reevaluate what the police, who the police are and who they serve. I have been involved maybe in 25 or 30 police cases over the last 30 years, locally as well as statewide and nationally and internationally, from Terrence Johnson to Mumia. So, and all of those cases provided an opportunity for me to see what the issue was. The issue is not any kind of civilian review board. The issue is not some kind of elections. The issue, in my opinion, has to do with the idea of protest, of demonstrations, of these other kinds of things that begin to address the issues of police brutality. Now let's talk about a crime in reference to. Okay, just 1 second.
Okay.
A crime in reference to.
I know you're a professor. That's why I'm just saying.
Well, I'm an activist first.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So we see that a crime is not a result of poverty. It is a result of in my belief, the economic system, which doesn't provide people jobs, which doesn't provide people a fair wage or fair labor or whatever. So I think that we have to look at these a little differently and to look internationally, to look 90 miles from Miami, quite frankly, as to what can be changed to make things better in reference to police brutality or to end police brutality.
Okay, thank you.
Mic check. Right. So anyway, first of all, I just want to say y'all got an amazing panelist tonight. So I just wanted to thank y'all for having this conversation. But most importantly, just like my brother was talking about, is it a crime? It seems like so many crimes are being committed nowadays, and it's okay. It's okay. And it's so not cool. Like literally, what's happening to the Johns Hopkins University students that are standing up saying, no, they don't want this. They're forced into it. It was 75% of the students that say, no, we don't want private police. And yet they're targeted, and now they're being harassed just for the settings, all types of things. And even when they walked me to my car, they sent a racist man waiting. He could have took my life, waiting in the dark, waiting 50 feet away from my car, and he attacked two women, two friends that were walking me to my safety. And if that wasn't enough, just last week, I'm on the corner, 33rd and Greenmount, and I'm looking at my brother Sean Yoes, who made the first connection with Ruiz and Chapman, being, involved in so many crimes and police brutality. But for Chapman, Nicholas Davis Chapman, to ride past me, to torment me a week before my brother's birthday is tomorrow. But for him to do this, that's not even his district. He's doing it, you know why? Because he can. Nobody has gotten back to me about this. My life is in danger, but nobody gives a damn. But I don't care, and I want everybody to hear me. If anything happens to me, shut it down. Blame Baltimore City. It is not a game. I can't even use my phone anymore. This is a new phone. They got this tab. Everything keep my memory filled up. I done deleted every app on my phone, but my memory's still filled up. Same thing happened to 3 other phones before this. It's utterly ridiculous. So when I say that these crimes, it's okay to do crimes in the city. They go after who they want to go after. The police are serving who they want to serve, and they're serving us death while they are protected by the officer killer rights and all type of rights. We have no one in real leadership. We don't have any type of money to where, though, like my brother was saying, if we get together, we got everybody right here. But we don't have resources. Everybody keeps saying we got the power. If we don't have any resources to implicate this power, we are powerless. I've been out here on the ground going on 6 years, not just for my brother Tyrone West, but for all the victims of police brutality and murder. We didn't want the uprising to happen. We was out there without signs before, and it still happened. So I'm telling y'all, if y'all don't get it right, something bad is going to happen. It's bound. Is y'all setting the recipe up? So y'all need to start holding folks accountable. That's from the mayor on down. Lottie-dottie and everybody. Thank you.
I just want to say something about police excessive force and that violence. And as we're talking about reducing the violence in Baltimore City, violence promotes violence. Police violence increases violence. And if there's any violence that we really do have immediate control over, it's police violence. If we're willing to do the work in holding people accountable, if we're willing to put pressure on the people who currently control the police department. But we have to be willing to do that. You shouldn't have to go through that, my sister. You should. We have so many police officers on this department right now who should not be there, and the evidence is there to remove them from service. It's there. Believe me, the evidence is there. I know it's there. But we need someone to take charge and make it happen. I'm hoping that this commissioner, and I've had conversations with him, I'm hoping that this commissioner will look into that evidence is there and put pressure upon the union. Here's my position on it. I don't care if they sue. You fire them, I don't care if they sue. Let them sue. But I'd rather have them sue than them to remain on a job to abuse the citizens in this city and in our neighborhoods who will potentially, or could potentially, well, as we've seen, lose their lives, severely injured, and then they turn around suing the city, and that's your money. That's your money that's leaving the coffers to pay for these lawsuits of abusive police officers and violent police officers.
But think
Let-
about
Oh, go
what
ahead.
Tawanda said. I started writing about those officers back like less than a year after Tyrone was killed. And he's still on the force.
That's why I'm saying the evidence is clearly there. And somebody's just got to make a courageous decision.
Okay. This is Tyrone West's sister that was just speaking, and I think it's important to hear what she was saying. She feels that she's at risk. It's upon us, everybody, to make sure that she's safe. When you see her somewhere, if she needs some help, go give her some support. Tyrone West was killed 6 years ago. Murdered, yes. And tomorrow is his 50th birthday. He would have been 50 tomorrow. So outside of City Hall, there's gonna be the West Wednesdays rally at 7 o'clock. So if you're concerned about her safety, you're concerned about that issue there, get up there in front of City Hall tomorrow. The Real News have been covering those kind of events, and we'll continue to cover those events. But the only way people can be safe in this city is that we start supporting each other. And so, and Professor Ken Morgan here said that he thanked me and the Real News. I have to give recognition that this is Paul J's brainchild here, what we're doing here now and what we should have been doing years ago, but we're doing it now. Maybe for the last 10 years, people didn't do shit. Didn't do anything, excuse me. But we are here to encourage some change now, okay? So there's another question. Go ahead.
Thank you. Can I hold that or? Okay. So my name is Lydell. Thank y'all panelists for talking on this issue and bringing this up. Thank y'all for a few of y'all who've spoken earlier today who said some comments about the community, and I want to bring that back up. Just thinking about the JHU policing and the civilian review board, the different ways that community have voiced their opinions on policing and have essentially been ignored. And considering the community members that should actually be part of that conversation, coming back to this conversation about specialists and who are the people who need to be at that table and who's important. I'm thinking about the people who are affected by policing in the city and people getting incarcerated, young men in the streets, or all our young people in the streets, and children that are lost by our school systems. And so what are ways that we can incorporate those community members, our young community members that are still developing, and as well as people who've already served time and have come back out into the community and haven't been benefited by the courts or any policing, any of these kind of systems, but need of some kind of voice, some kind of way being integrated back into the community and actually being understood, because I feel like they would best understand how policing actually happens. Yes, community members in the neighborhood have understanding of how policing happens in that neighborhood, but how it actually impacts your life and how it affects you. People who've served time, people who've been in prison or arrested, I feel should have some kind of voice on that. And I want to know what the panel's thoughts are on that.
Well, again, this goes back to our question about subject matter experts. People who are returning citizens are subject matter experts. Any board, any commission, any discussion should make sure it includes those voices. Ex-offenders have the right to vote. And I know that, if voting was going to be the end-all be-all, the world will look a whole lot different. But until we create a new system, we have to participate in the system that exists. And ex-offenders have the right to vote in the state of Maryland. So we need to make sure we are First of all, letting our brothers and sisters know that they have the right to vote, because the information that is available is very misleading. And you go and tell somebody that they can't go and vote, and they say, no, I can't, because when I go to the Board of Elections website, it still says on the ballot that I can't, and it's just not the truth. So they have the right to vote and participate in our legislative system. And we need to make sure that we're uplifting those voices too. We need to make sure there should be somebody on this panel who is an ex-offender, who's a returning citizen. We need,
Okay, but go ahead.
checkmate, I got you. But we have to make sure that they're always a part of the conversation and that we're pushing them into the forefront. And it's just the truth. It's easy for us to find other people to be the spokespeople, but the people who are most directly affected really have to be the ones who lead. And in order for that to happen, other people do need to step back. And that's just the bottom line.
There's some very powerful organizations in different states across the country of formerly incarcerated people. And if you want to, I can give you my information after the show and connect you with them. For instance, in Florida right now, we just passed Amendment 4, which restored the voting rights to returning citizens, felons. And they're fighting it. They're trying to play some tricks right now. But again, there's some very, very powerful organizations or groups of formerly incarcerated who are doing some wonderful things. Again, you are the subject matter expert, so I'll connect you to some of those people.
Okay, you have any input?
No, not really. I mean, I just acknowledge what you alluded to, the fact that you sacrificed decades of your life in prison for the liberation of these communities in Baltimore. And we should dap you up, while in person, and say it publicly as opposed to just letting it be implied. So much respect, man, for everything that you've done.
All right, thank you.
We just wanted to thank everybody for coming out and joining us at the Real Talk, though. We will have another one in 2 weeks. We just want to say thank you, and please come back.